like there's no reason for anyone to feel like they have to be Zionist to be a Jew, to be Jewish. There just isn't. That's the most frustrating part for me. Someone who doesn't, as I said, I don't care about being Jewish. I don't even use the word, but plenty of my family members do. And it's like, these don't have to go together.
If someone were to say to you, Jews run the world, they run the banks, they run the media, it's all a big conspiracy. Look at the Rothschild, look at this. What would you say, or how would you approach that?
This is dangerous territory now. Like all this stuff, it's fun.
But to be Jewish culturally is to seemingly have this tie to Israel, no matter where you are. I mean, what is just your
I'll introduce
walking through all that?
Absolutely. So and I actually always used to say post-Holocaust American Judaism, because I think it's that specific of like what I was exposed to. And so here's the thing. I was born in Pennsylvania, Allentown, Pennsylvania. It's a suburb of Philly, close enough to New York. Jewish community there. In fact, my parents, one of the reasons we settled there beyond just my father's job was my mother wanted me to be around a Jewish community and be embedded in that. She grew up in Pittsburgh and outside of it, and even a more homogenous Jewish community, which is still there, frankly. So I grew up going like so conservative Judaism. So there's Reform Judaism and there's conservative Judaism, there's Orthodox, and they have their different histories to a degree, which actually intersect with Zionism a bit, but you could basically think of them as gradients of adherence to like practices. Like if you meet someone Orthodox, probably 95% chance they keep kosher. If you meet someone conservative, it's like maybe 30%, and Reform is probably 10. It's basically those practices, how often you go to service, whatever. That's the way I thought of it. So I was the middle. It's like the medium flavor Judaism in America. So that meant high holidays. So Passover, Yom Kippur, Rosh Hashanah, maybe 4 or 5 times a year, you would go to synagogue and wear a suit and get dressed up. Maybe the very occasional Shabbat service. And you would have a bar mitzvah. I had a bar mitzvah at 13, and just about all my Jewish friends were going to have one, which it was really just a glorified birthday party. I just went to my brother's son's birthday or bar mitzvah, which I will talk about. But to your question of kind of like what it was like, it's so hard to. I keep losing touch with what people who didn't grow up with it think of it. So I kind of want to ask you like what you think, and I'm going to give you kind of like yes or no answers of like how often do you think did we like pray to the state of Israel? Did we talk about it at home? Did we talk about God? Was I made to fear hell? Like what is your impression of someone like me, born in 82? Grew up in this.
Well, I would imagine there's the for sure milestones, yearly in terms of like Passover, right? It's like that's the the importance of we've been persecuted.
What do you think happens at a Passover?
I believe it's a focus on the story of Exodus and how the Jews escaped Egypt and how that's repeated throughout history, and it's sort of the Jewish community has to stick together because they've had this history of persecution. Which is true. And I think so. It's a focus on that. It's a focus on what it means to be Jewish. But I'm spitballing. Never been to a Passover.
It's a dinner. I mean, Peter Beinart. The joke that we've all heard of, they tried to kill us, we survived, let's eat. Passover, one of those. And there's this, it's called a Seder. It's a certain kind of dinner with like an order that you tell the story of Exodus.
Right.
In our house, you went around the table, everyone read a little piece of the Haggadah, which is the prayer book specifically for that night that tells the story. You do finish it by saying next year in Jerusalem, which I believe was added after this might be wrong. It may have been added after the destruction of the temple. That might be true, but it certainly was added after 1967 war in those Haggadahs. But you're like cheers with like the next year in Jerusalem.
Meaning will like be in Jerusalem?
We will celebrate in Jerusalem. Like if you're not there, if you're having that dinner anywhere in the world and you're not there, you're supposed to sort of like, it's, metaphorical, but also like a cheers of like, we'll go back. It's a reminder that Israel exists. There is a story I won't tell it again here in my essay on the Zionist stranglehold on Kamala, where I tell the story of the 4 children and I was the wicked child, which is an interesting story.
Right, yeah.
Because that's Passover, and that's kind of what a lot of them look like. Yom Kippur is like the Day of Atonement, where you go to the synagogue and for me, it was very boring. You would just sit there and listen to a bunch of Hebrew that you didn't understand, and you were supposed to repent for your sins. It's the most sort of Christian day in Judaism, I think, because it's a day where God's book of life is opened or something, and you're supposed to reflect on your sins and good deeds or whatever of the last year, and you hope to be inscribed in the book of life. There's not as much emphasis on God and hell, at least in, like, I didn't grow up believing in God or fearing hell the way a lot of like my Christian and Muslim friends tell me.
Yeah,
I never did any of that.
That I've only spoken, you know, on a few occasions with some like religious Jews about like their theology and stuff like that. And it wasn't clear to me what if hell was. It's like hell is sort of this gray area. It's more of a purgatory type thing, and it's not obvious that non-Jews even go to heaven or hell.
I never got any of it.
Yeah, which is interesting. And I grew up pretty like hardcore, not like, you know, insane Christian, but like pretty. I would pray out loud every night, and the fear of hell was for sure a real thing. That like, you know, I'm very sympathetic to sort of religious fundamentalists who are kind of caught in the like, imagine the worst torture that you could possibly imagine forever. It's like that's a powerful psychological prison.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was certainly a big element of that.
So I'll say the thing that I knew. So I was sent to Hebrew school as a child, elementary school. I think it was Tuesdays and Thursdays. I had to go after school for more school. I did not like any of it. I found it very, very boring. There, you're just learning how to read a lot of Hebrew and stuff, and you're getting some sanitized biblical stories for children. There's a major emphasis on Israel. You learn it as the land of milk and honey. And keep in mind, in all of this, I've always said this before, but the Israeli flag is just kind of there. Like, it's on the bima, which is the stage where you pray to, where the rabbi is and stuff, and where the Torah is. It's certainly in conversation at places like Hebrew school as a kid. You never learn the word Palestinians, that's for sure. It may have changed, but I certainly didn't. But what it's all sort of leading to is certainly your bar mitzvah when you're 13, but it's all, for me, was leading to, and you're also expected, at least in my community, to go to Israel on a summer trip after you're 16 years old, which I did not go to. I tell that story as well. I went to West Africa instead. But I think before that, and it's quite intentional, like when you're 15 or so, at least where we were in Pennsylvania, we all went as a school, as a Hebrew school, at least my class, probably like 20 or 30 of us, to the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C., which is an amazing museum, incredibly well done. But I think it's no coincidence that is, frankly, like the real pilgrimage, the real bar mitzvah, is to go seep yourself into the actual human disaster and awfulness of the Nazi extermination efforts of the Jews, the Jewish Holocaust, because there was many attempted exterminations during that time. And then within a year, basically, you're in Israel. And tying the two together is the very not so subtle message of like, this is the danger, this is the necessary lifeboat we have to build, and this belongs to you as a Jew, as your place to go. But to back up, sort of like in my family and my exposure to this is, I probably, I may have mentioned this last time too, I probably saw or asked my first question ever about Palestinians or Israel from seeing like MTV News. I think like, I remember being in my basement, MTV News was like probably a very small cable channel. And I remember seeing images of young boys throwing rocks and then getting shot at, and asking my parents about it. Probably like 9 or 10 years old to a degree. I had one older brother, so it matters because he was 3 years older. So he was ahead of me in all of these things. And my parents, this is where I definitely first heard the land without people for people without land myth, and that Palestinians don't exist, and that it's a made up nationality. That just got further and further entrenched as I grew up and got older. My brother went to Israel on that summer trip. He came home with an IDF t-shirt as a gift for me. I didn't resist any of this. I was just like a young kid appreciative of my brother's gift. And so, yeah, like this was just sort of the the state of things. I began arguing with my mother mostly about it really fiercely in my teenage years. She pushed me to go and to get confirmed from Hebrew school, which is basically just stay until you're 16 and you graduate. She now regrets it. She said, so I was just resisting all of this as a, there's probably part of me that just angsty that I was going to resist anything that anyone forced me to do and I couldn't question. I was going to question it just naturally. And to sort of summarize that, I could question God. I could question the belief in God. I just could not question whether Israel was a ethical project. I was just told it was a necessary project. So when someone tells you it's necessary, you're kind of not even allowed to ask the next question: is it ethical, or should I support it? And on a personal level, and I've told this story before, I could observe that this Judaism thing was really important to my family. It was not very important to me. And literally out of love and concern for this thing that they loved, I was like, Zionism is going to be the thing that kills it. It's going to be the thing that kills the thing that you love. Because once you start scratching the surface on it, the ethics and the history of it is so obscene that this is going to become untenable. And like the original Edmund Rothschild predicted, make it less safe for Jews everywhere in the world. But just to give you a little update of sort of where the state of where things are at now, because I think it's gotten so bad. So my brother, he lives also still in Pennsylvania, and his youngest son just got his bar mitzvah, and I was invited. It was a little tense about my invitation. I behaved myself, I think. I sat in the back of the synagogue because I was reserving the right to just quietly step out during any time I felt uncomfortable, which I only did once. And so there's a Shabbat service, which is like the Friday night that the bar mitzvah boy leads some prayers in Hebrew or whatever, helps the rabbi. You could think of it that way. And then the next day is the real bar mitzvah. So the bar mitzvah is the reading, the actual reading of the Torah. It's those big scrolls people have seen. If you've seen the unrolled this way, it's the 5 books of Moses. And it's a very special honor to read directly from it. You're not even supposed to touch it. There's this thing called like a yad, that's like a pointer. But the bar mitzvah or bat mitzvah for a girl is you doing that, and that like going through this rite of passage then earns you the right to sort of be accepted into the community and be called to do that anytime. And I think it's a very, very old tradition of like, you get to read from the book in front of everyone. You just read a little, like a couple paragraphs of it, you chant it, whatever. So that's the next day. But at the Friday night service, which is the Shabbat service, this is a Reform synagogue actually. So it's like the lowest branch should be. I'll tell you the state of things. We walk in, my wife and I are there. We go to hang up our jackets, and there are placards in the jacket room for Philly Stands with Israel, clearly to go on the side of the road and chant. By the way, I told everyone, like in a joke, even with Peter Beinart, being like, listen, I'm not going to start a Palestine rally in the middle of the synagogue. I'm not a jerk. But someone's having a rally here, and it's not me, actually. So let's be honest about that. But that's whatever. They can do their thing. And by the way, I love my brother and I love the kid. Oh, and actually before all of this, my brother's awesome. And he gets a lot out of these kinds of traditions and ceremonies. He's always been a little just bit more into that stuff his whole life. I view him and now his son as kind of a victim of a lot of this stuff where they hijack a kind of really simple, lovely thing into this ugly thing. But he certainly knows how I feel about all this. And he had reached out before I went, and he said, which is great. He watched the Peter Beinart interview and he really liked it and stuff. And he was like, I know you're feeling a little weird about this stuff, or always have. Like, I haven't set foot in a synagogue in decades. And he's like, if you don't want to participate in any of it, don't let me know. If you don't want to read any of the prayers or whatever, or come up and help, just let me know. I was like, dude, I'll totally help. I probably don't want to read any of the things, but put me in however you want. And he was like, oh, cool. You and your wife can open the ark, which is you just go up one time and sort of like open the curtain. We did that. Really lovely. And he also said, he's like, I actually talked to my synagogue about some of this stuff. And I guess on their website, it had said, temple, I forget the name of the temple, whatever, fully supports the state of Israel. This was on their website. And he said, I talked to them and they removed the word fully. I was like small steps, but yeah, just to let you know, that's where we're at with this level of how taboo it is to even question any of this stuff. during the service, in the prayer book. None of this is new or a surprise to me. In the prayer book, there's prayers for Israel all over the place. I will also caveat the word Israel, and this was all done very intentionally by the Zionists.
Right, of course.
The word Israel is the Hebrew word for like the Jewish people that, was it Joshua gets renamed Israel by the angel or whatever.
But biblical Israel versus the secular, so-called secular state of Israel.
Like it's a stand-in word for the diaspora, kind of, in the biblical sense. But it's I dare anyone just open a prayer book. It's pretty easy to parse which uses are in use. The declaration of the state of Israel is in the prayer book. The declaration, it's like it's not hiding there. They didn't read that part out loud, but it's on a bunch of pages. So there's a lot of Israel stuff. Of course, the Israeli flag is there. And then you end the service with the entire congregation standing up, being asked by the rabbi to turn towards the flag of Israel and pray. And so that's the only part that I wasn't a jerk. I didn't say, I just quietly stepped out. It was the very last thing in the service. And then had a lovely time.
And this is a reformed synagogue, right? So this is the theoretically the least
vanilla version of it. Yeah.
Interesting.
Although it's not such a clean, like the more adherents you get, it's not always the more Zionist.
Correct. Sometimes it's the opposite, right? It's the more Orthodox are the ones who are going to Palestine and standing with some of them.
Yeah, because of course there's I think a really honest interpretation that much of Judaism is against idol worship, and there's a whole strain for thousands of years saying the destruction of the temple was actually God's reminder to not worship land, whatever. So there's that. I mean, these are not really my fights, but just letting everyone know, like, that's the state of what happens there. And it was great. The kid had an awesome time. It was a little difficult for me. My family was okay with me there, and I was quiet. But the shame is this, like, all I wanted at this kind of space, and all I still want, if anyone out there is struggling with this, is like, I wanted, when I was a 13-year-old boy and a 14, 15, in that age group, somewhere in the community, in the room, in the space, to have it be known that there is criticism of this, or questions that you might be having about this running in your head, doubts that this might be a little wrong, checking the news and seeing like the atrocities that we're seeing, and which are awful now, but have kind of always been happening. If you have questions and a problem about that, like, there is someone else here, or there is space here to sort of have that be heard and echoed and carefully discussed. And that's kind of all I wanted, is like, I've got, of course, my nephew and all of these 13-year-old boys I'm seeing there, and their friends, and I've got cousins with kids there and stuff. It's just like, if anyone asks any questions, ever has any questions, like, I just want them to know I exist. And I just want them to know, like, this conversation is possible and does exist. And it's not my fight to be like, can you rescue Judaism from Zionism? But I think it's a worthy fight for someone to have, and I think it's a necessary fight. And that's kind of all I wanted. And without sort of divulging, family dirty secrets, like, I tried a little with cousins in the hotel, and it just didn't. It's just not open. It's just not open. Mm-hmm. And so I was pretty dismayed by the state of where we're at with that conversation. I don't know. That was a lot I just gave you.
No, that's insightful. I don't want to dig into this stuff. One of the questions I had was, what kind of, as someone who is Jewish and anti-Zionist, what kind of criticism do you get? What is the harshness? Obviously, like you said, there's no space for you to be able to, like, hey, I think it's wrong to turn and pray towards the flag of a secular nation. But I mean, I'm sure you get called self-hating Jew quite often. Yeah,
of course. I mean, mostly I just get just the cold shoulder. I feel a little strange talking so much about my family, but not really. Cause last time we talked about sort of the IDW people and all that. And I always felt there was all kinds of skeletons in the closet of psychology that we didn't bring on to those stages. And I always felt it was dishonest. I feel like these kinds of conversations, like we're all people. Everybody listening to this has their own bullshit, their own families. And like, we have to be honest. And I'm going to try to be honest about what compromises me or whatnot. And I can't get behind my own psychology of what made me more, I don't know, willing to sort of go against the grain in a way that my brother couldn't. I mean, these are like deep Freudian whatever conversations we could all get into. But I had it, you know, like I'll give you a small funny example of like, this is the nitty gritty of how, like, why we have to get into this stuff of like, I don't know what they were called in your school, but you remember when like cliques were starting to form in schools, and there's the jocks and there's the nerds and the gators or whatever. Like, I always felt, it's just like a little example. In my school, we had this great name for them. They were just called the Dirts, DIRTS, which kind of encompassed the like goths and the skaters, and kind of, it was just the Dirts and the jocks.
Yeah.
Great. It's a very like
hipsters. I categorize my two friend groups as the jock friend group and the hipster friend group.
Interesting.
And the hipsters would be the
more over different generations.
Yeah.
Sort of the next one, but we have the Dirts, whatever. But I always felt that I identified with the Dirts on cultural levels. I loved, you know, indie music and kind of like goth music. I was a bad skater, but like I could skate and stuff. But I loved baseball, and my dad was always the coach. And so I grew up, before you break into the cliques, everyone's friends when you're like 10 years old, and they all knew me as like a baseball kid, and I've remained playing baseball. So I was a pitcher, so like I could strike out the jocks and I could compete with them, but then I would hang out with the nerds and the dirts. And so like maybe where my brother did not quite have that like versatility in his world. So for whatever reason, I never felt threatened by like being kind of sidelined by my family or being left alone in the world, because I always felt like I had somewhere to go and somewhere to be. This is a funny reference, but Malcolm Gladwell did a really awesome show years and years ago about, I forget what he called it, about grit or something, but it was about the underhanded free throw. it was a great episode, because it was all about how like it works better shooting the underhanded free throw. Like everyone's percentage goes up. It's way easier, but everyone's like, I'm not doing it because I look like a sissy. But I think it was like Rick Barry, the first one who did it.
Yeah, there's some,
Yeah, and it but basically was about like how he wasn't afraid of being like shunned and made fun of in a way. And maybe I have a bit of that psychological sort of like layer in me, as it were. So to answer it, like it's, no one yells at me. There's a little of that now. It's a lot of kind of this like not so subtle threat of like, you're not going to be invited to this thing and you're not going to be a part of this. Sometimes, of course, there's even financial of like, well, inheritance or whatever. It can get to that level of just like this weird kind of bullying. And for some people, and so everyone's compromised at different levels of these things. And some people might be more alone and fear kind of losing their friend group. Some people, maybe like my mother, has spent kind of an entire life building this structure that if you start to question it, you really will be kind of pushed out and shunned to a degree. So I'm not here to judge anybody's inability to, leave or overturn the apple cart. The biggest shame to me, as I mentioned a few times here now, is like there is a long tradition of Jews who are anti-Zionist and have been fighting this fight, who even went to Israel and have been warning about this kind of stuff for years and years and years. And they've been silenced, sometimes killed, sometimes eliminated in various reasons. And there's no reason for anyone to feel like they have to be Zionist to be a Jew, to be Jewish. There just isn't. That's the most frustrating part for me. Someone who doesn't, as I said, I don't care about being Jewish. I don't even use the word, but plenty of my family members do. And it's like, these don't have to go together.
Right. Yeah. The idea that someone's genetics therefore must require beliefs of one kind or another. That's always been the most problematic idea. Okay. Well, speaking of this, I'd like to get your reaction to this clip.
Like, why is there this double standard? And this is sort of like goes to talking about this timidity that I've seen amongst Jews, or the sideline Jews, who are just not standing up for their own community at a time which they
regarding the sideline Jews, some number of them, of course, agree with the narrative that Israel's committing a genocide, and that if you're a Zionist, then you're enabling that. I don't know what that number is. I've read 5% of Jews are anti-Zionist. Just seems like more than that. Just in my own personal experience, just the comics I know, the Jewish comics I know, several of them are of that mind. So I don't know how. Deborah Winger was. I recently saw her on YouTube.
We saw her
speaking out
week.
against Israel.
Not just against Israel. She's speaking out against her own upbringing, against her own family. I mean, that's the maniacal nature of this whole pathology. Is like, have we ever seen a famous black actor going on TV speaking against their own black upbringing? Yet here we have Deborah Winger basically deriding, conventional American Jewish culture because she feels it supports Israel. I mean, and of course, what does Hamas and all the jihadis love more than a Jew who's willing to pimp their cause for them? I mean, talk about like billions of dollars in free marketing, and these folks are basically legitimizing what everybody else is doing. I mean, these are the worst kinds of people. But this is America.
So as a sideline Jew, Jay, who is of the worst kind of people,
those comedy seller people have been a real special breed of awful since this thing started. By the way, I haven't been engaged with them directly, but I know my former friend and co-host Coleman Hughes has a bit, and
Interesting. I will say Noam, I think his name is. I've watched a couple interviews. I do respect a lot of how he approaches things. Mr. Kaufman, not so much. I mean, what do you say to the charge that you're maniacal, evil, and that there is nothing Hamas loves more than a Jew who is anti-Zionist, right? You're kind of proving their point. So, do you not feel that you are in some sense putting Jews at risk, putting Israelis at risk by being what did he say? Free marketing for Hamas and jihadis?
I mean, I don't. There's so much confusion in that clip that it's hard to know where to start. I don't know if the interesting thing would be like, is a conversation with someone like that possible? Like if you were trying to set up a real formal conversation, and I'm willing to talk to anyone, but it feels like there's such a distance between what he's saying. First of all, I mean, I obviously reject the premise that anybody has any kind of special obligation to defend their tribe, period. Like it was an accident of birth of where I was. And I've always viewed, I think the universe is accidental. This is interesting, and it relates back to my family because we've been, as I've hinted at, there is this sort of, well, you will be on the outside of this club, right? Like there's the difference between an obligation and an opportunity is like central to my philosophy and moral philosophy. And I was not, I did not ask to be born, and neither did you, and neither did anyone else. There's, we feel these things like familial obligations, right? Like, for example, my brother has a daughter who's younger, who in 3 years will be having a bat mitzvah. I would be lying if I didn't say I don't feel some kind of like tug as an obligation to attend that. But I think that's the worst source of feeling obligation. Certainly why I'm not religious. What I do think and feel, and why I mentioned that what I wish I could have forged in some respectful and open and honest way at this bar mitzvah at any point, was looking for an opportunity to sort of present like, hey, there's other things in the world. There's other parts of this conversation. And it shouldn't clash with your Judaism. And if your rabbi is saying it does, maybe we have a problem there too. But I wasn't really able to successfully do it, but I was thinking of like, how do I attend this bar mitzvah? As a loving uncle, I love my nephew. He's my fantasy baseball co-owner. We're like buddies online. Like we do our thing, but like as an opportunity to be like to hang out with people, to see people I haven't seen in a while, whether or not they like me, but as an opportunity rather than an obligation. So family generally, including biological family, but if he's going to extend it to like racial family, a little weird. But if you're going to extend it that way, I'm not going to totally reject it. Still not an obligation, it's an opportunity. And I even talked about this with Peter of like, I view, and this is hard for, I think a lot of parents, especially my mother, to be like, I don't feel obligated to you as my mother. But what I do feel is that I've known you since I was born, right? Families have seen each other in some of our most vulnerable, open, awful, and best moments. We know each other really well. And it's like a friend that like you're thrown into the universe as a close group people of like insane friends, but you have an opportunity. Like Paul, if you had a friend who you knew your whole life and you saw them behaving in a certain way, you might be you have an insight into them, and hopefully just a universal kind of love that you would extend to then maybe if you could, you know, find a place to enact that opportunity to help them or assist them or love them in whatever way. That's how I feel about my family. And if he wants to extend that to Israel, if he wants to extend that to Jews, I'll do it. Like, okay, I also share, as I said, post-Holocaust American Judaism is a specific thing. So that's really where my focus is, which is slightly different than post-Holocaust Israeli Judaism, but they're obviously very mirrored, very, very, very mirrored. In fact, you know, they literally immigrate all the time together. This is where all the Jews in the world are, including some people in my family who survived the Holocaust and then went to Israel and fought and then ended up living in America. Like it's very closely related. But a lot of the stuff that I talked through in those earlier long answers about my Judaism or my encounter with the Holocaust and being taught about never-againism and Hitlerism and anti-Semitism and all these ways, full of mythology, full of plenty of truths, full of all that stuff, reading Elie Wiesel, all that stuff. I have a familiarity to a degree with maybe those Israeli Jews, although it's getting more and more distant as these generations go on. But I have some familiarity. And so I would look at it in the exact same way as if you saw your family acting in some dreadfully awful, potentially dangerous way. And then this is where you and I would argue about history, potentially misguided or deluded way built on maybe a false belief and a mythology that I would like to discuss with them. I would try to intervene and get them to stop for two reasons. One, of course, because it's putting them in more danger and I don't want that. And two, because I think the mythologies in their head and the bad ideas in their head or the corruptions or whatever are actually causing awful pain to the other group. So there's just something very sick about his premise of this like inherent racial obligation you have to your own race. It sounds, you know, like calling someone a race traitor or whatever. This is someone like the most ridiculous language. His premise is messed up. And then the only word to pick out about the like, well, I'm pretty sure he also doesn't have a good grasp of sort of the historical relationship is just lumping Hamas into sort of the general jihadist bucket of the world and wiping your hands of it and calling it a day without any kind of sort of more nuanced or intricate sort of examination of what Hamas is and who they are and what they were birthed out of. Not to make excuses for them. I'm no fan of Hamas, but I don't know if you saw the filing that they just put in the UK to get their terrorism designation. It's rather fascinating. It's long. You don't have to read. I haven't read the whole thing yet. But the first page, literally, I don't know if you've seen this, and you could say it's a cynical ploy, but I really don't think so. Literally talks about the scourge of anti-Semitism and how we have to fight it everywhere, and then makes a pretty good effort to split anti-Zionism from anti-Semitism and what their mission is, and how they're like, we are not out to get the United Kingdom. If you step foot in the Zionist project and you participate in it, you're fair game. But like, we're not blowing up buses in London. You know, that's not our project. Like, and we need to fight anti-Semitism everywhere. And yes, as that guy, whatever his name is, they also do praise people like me. They're like, we champion the Jews who are helping to fight anti-Semitism out there. I've traveled in the West Bank with my last name very widely. No one cares. No one cares. If I had said I'm a Zionist and I support the IDF, wouldn't have been killed on the spot. They probably wouldn't have been so friendly to me. If I'd actually participated in the IDF, then it's more dangerous. Obviously, they're not allowed to go. But no one cares that I'm Jewish in the West Bank. Nobody, like literally nobody. And I wasn't even speaking very like openly anti-Zionist, but they certainly knew I was critical of the project. And yeah, so I don't know. He sounds like a real special like piece of work. So I'm not that offended by his ridiculousness. I hope it's not that popular.
I wrote this down. So there are people on the right specifically who say that it's Jews as a race that are a problem. It's not Zionism. It's not Judaism. It's in their genetics. I think that's a lie. I don't think there's any evidence for that, certainly. And then, not to say it's just a morally disgusting, pathetic belief. And ironically, it's the same people who use the word race traitors. Yeah. Right. Would be like the white supremacists who say, well, Jews as a race are a problem. And so, one of the most important political projects is separating Zionism, which is a belief, from being a Jew, racially. It's absolutely necessary to criticize ideas. And I don't think, the label of anti-Semitism is absolutely abused to silence criticism of ideas. And that includes culture. So like, for example, white Protestant Christianity has produced a lot of, good results with the kind of the Protestant work ethic, but it's also produced a hyper obsession with individualism, right? Which is sort of, we're in agreement on a lot of the kind of, the underlying neoliberal problems with neoliberalism. That is a direct link out of white Protestant Christianity. Then you have black culture. Black culture is basically all of the best aspects of American culture are kind of like black culture, But there is I think it's absolutely fair to point out how there's elements of black culture that can be demoralizing to black people that say, oh, well, you're in a white supremacist structure. No matter what you do, you'll never get ahead. And I think the same thing can be said about Jewish culture. I think obviously it's produced more valuable geniuses than I think, any other race, despite being so disproportionately small, that have made contributions to society. But it's like, it does seem like there are criticisms you can make of it, like that it overemphasizes in-group loyalty. And then in the worst cases, like what's happening in the West Bank, the whole God's chosen people idea gets used to justify ethno-supremacy. Yeah. So what is the right way to levy a critique against ideas that are not just ideas, they're part of traditions and all that, which then makes it feel personal, feels like an attack on one's race. But I don't know, what is the proper way to address these kinds of issues where it's like, I think I've leaned a bit too hard. I don't mind offending people. So like when I say people who believe the earth is created in 6,000 years old are dumb, deranged, I don't care, these people are foolish, especially if they want to start preventing evolution from being taught in schools. It's like the God's chosen people idea. I think that's ridiculous. I think that's it's un-American, it's un-egalitarian. You're free to believe it, and I genuinely could get along and respect someone who believes that, internally. It's a different thing than when they use that as a justification to say, well, God promised my race a particular piece of land in the Middle East, and now, Paul, your government, we're going to lobby your government to support it. So I don't know. I mean, what is the proper way to have those conversations without empowering, the genuine anti-Semites who are just like, well, this is just it's in their genes, Paul. You can't trust Jay, no matter how critical he is of Israel.
I don't know if I have any easy answer for you. I rarely do when you ask me questions.
Wow, that's fair.
Yeah, but I have something. But it's to go back to my Jewish upbringing and what like the real alarm bells were, because I think this is maybe the way into it, is if anyone's listening to this and wants to crack open a Torah or Jewish prayer book or whatever, like what I've laid out as my childhood is, like I said, it sounds very unreligious. It's like no God talk, like I never prayed before bed like you. I never thought about God or heaven or hell or any of that stuff. But I was like very Jewish, plugged into this thing. And as I sort of hinted at, maybe not even enough, the Judaism, the mantra was never again, never againism. Like I learned about the Holocaust ad nauseum. Like that is what it was. I mean, in America, there's tons of movies where the Nazis are the bad guys or whatever, and just Holocaust all the time. Like that is what you needed to know, and it's close to you. I mean, I'm of the generations where I had great grandparents who were directly in it, and grandparents with memories of it and stuff. And even and tons of the Hebrew school education as you get a little older, like past 13 years old, you get a little bit more heavy dose of Holocaust, probably too brutal for the younger kids. When you're younger, so all the stories in the Torah, you know, there's always a bad guy who wants to kill the Jews, like Haman at Pesach and stuff, and or the Pharaoh in Egypt. There's always a bad guy, but as you get a little older, it starts to take the form of a swastika. And I was I was paying really close attention. Like the tragedy that I've always said of me being sort of shunned by my they're Zionists really, but this Jewish Zionist post-Holocaust, whatever, obsession community, is that I really feel like I was paying really good attention to the education, which was the Holocaust was awful, the Holocaust was awful, the Holocaust was awful. And anti-Semitism is always there, and this was just another version of it, and you should be terrified because it's going to come back at any time. And so that was the part that I was questioning, where it was like, I remember very clearly, I must have been 14 or 15 years old, getting a lesson about the Holocaust in some ways and learning about Hitler, and someone using the word that he was a monster, one of my teachers, and I raised my hand and I said, monsters don't exist. Hitler was a man, right? And like this was the start of the questions of like, wait a minute, you know, like this is not some supernatural
right
devil.
It's a Jungian point. It's Jordan Peterson harps on this all the time. It's like everything horrible that human beings have done was done by human beings, and you're one of them.
And you're one of them, yeah. And so that was the first time of stepping on kind of these landmines because you start to peel back like, wait, you know, how did the Holocaust really happen? And immediately the alarm bells, which of course I get now, is the Jews brought about their own destruction, right? Like, even what I said before about Rothschild being like, oh, you know, being accused of dual loyalty, you're actually going to cause anti-Semitism. So someone's been like, oh, the Holocaust was their own fault. Like, you know, you start to fall into these victim blaming traps. But I rejected everything supernatural, including evil, right? Including supernatural evil. And so Hitler wasn't evil. Hitler was a man. So were the Germans. And it's like, obviously when you're a teenager, you're not going to start understanding the macroeconomics of hyperinflation in Germany. And like, but that should come later. Like you should start an honest discussion of like, if we are going to take the mantra of never againism seriously, then we need to know how it happens. We need to be honest about how it happens. And so I know it's exhausting for people, but I do think history, and there is no such thing as one objective, honest history, but historical investigation that is not afraid of the taboos that I just mentioned, just needs to be investigated openly and honestly and get there. So like, for example, I've mentioned the Rothschilds now, go back a little further. And I also want to just point out that, because like we're having this discussion in 2025, I feel like we're in a really sweet spot right now of like ChatGPT and AI, that you can actually, like Wikipedia is great and do all your research and ask for sources, of course, on ChatGPT, but I actually feel like it's really good. Not that I read tons of books, but like you can cram a lot of good information. Let me scratch some of this. And I don't think it's going to last very long, to be honest, because too much of this stuff is actually a little bit like it pulls the rug out of the empire in a way that I feel like will get censored at some point soon. But so anything I'm saying, like pause, whatever. But to your point of like Jews create a lot of geniuses and Nobel Prize winners and stuff, and they value education. These are tropes that people in my family might take on as like markers of their genetic superiority, which I think is messed up, right? I reject that, and you reject that too. But there might be historical reasons for these, at least factors and influences. So, for example, Meyer Rothschild, he's the father of all the Rothschilds that you probably know. He was in finance. His parent, I think he was in Frankfurt. His parents both died when he was young. He was an orphan. But just to even start that conversation a little earlier, 1700s, the Jews were forced to live where they lived. They weren't allowed to own land, right? Like, and so they were a bit of a sort of like secluded class. It wasn't like overt poverty, and it wasn't yet the Warsaw Ghetto, but they lived where they lived because they had to live where they live, and they weren't allowed to own land. So to survive, they did a lot of other things. And because all of the Christian empires were all in such bitter battles with each other, the Jews became the default bankers because a lot of them went to them because they didn't have a lot of skin in the game, and they were also subservient.
Yeah,
right?
and usury wasn't a sin in Judaism, where it was in Christianity.
That's
which is
true
just
too.
which is like a backwards aspect of Christianity you could criticize.
Yeah.
The Holocaust Museum, I read an article on there that states exactly that. Like, Jews were forced into a lot of these industries because they had no other options, which explains in part the disproportionate representation.
Yeah.
Aside from being high IQ to begin with and focus on education. Yeah. Well, but aside from that, just having a historical, lineage in that.
So like, if people want to read the story of Meyer Rothschild, who literally opens after his parents die, he goes and he gets an internship through the Jewish community. They were all bankers, through one of the royal court finance groups. So he started to know some of the royalty or whatever, and got to know how they thought. But he literally opens up a rare coin shop, literally like, ancient Rome coins and collectibles and some gold trading and stuff, like probably from his from his house, like downstairs. There's a little shop. And the prince one day of, I think it was Prince Edward something, whatever, it was Charles, whatever, walks in because he likes collecting rare coins. And like through this little conversation gets to know him, and pretty soon becomes like his trusted investment guy. And that's the dude who starts the Rothschild empire. And then he has 5 sons, and he intentionally spreads them to every European capital to create this finance network, and ends up becoming the Rothschilds that we all know, insanely wealthy and funding wars, and they were the financiers, and you could get into all the stuff. And I do think it's not a conspiracy theory, it's just history, but massively influential. All that is to say is like, nobody wants to sort of give any credence, including this clip that you played me, for someone like Hamas or the Nazis or Hitler or whatever, but they don't just burst out of hell out of the hatred of their hearts for Jews or for anyone else. They are birthed in the context of sometimes exaggerated conspiracy theories, sometimes exaggerated religious stories, and sometimes real persecution. Hitler doesn't get the idea that the Jews screwed over Germany and was the cause of their World War I collapse out of nowhere, right? He's piecing that together through the financiers of World War I and who they favored in the war and everything else. And of course, his mother, I think, dies there was a Jewish doctor. Like, you could piece through all of these things, and it's how you create a monster, right?
Right. And you combine it with the fact that he was in World War I and watched like all of his friends die. He's already traumatized to begin with.
Yeah.
So he's vulnerable to all this insane, shit.
And so like, just history is just not so clean, and history is not supernatural, and these things are explainable. Like, we have to, as good scientists and philosophers and hopefully political scientists, like, look for real explanations. And this doesn't discount. Obviously, this like runs counter to the Sam Harrises and people who put just only emphasis on supernatural motivation. And I'm not discounting that supernatural motivation or justification, however you parse that scaffolding chicken and egg question, plays a significant role in entrenching these ideas, inflating these ideas, inflaming these ideas, sometimes planting the seeds for these ideas, but they come out of somewhere. And so I don't know. I don't know if that answers your question, but it's Hamas and things like, I mean, you could do the same thing with Al Qaeda, right? Like, you could do the same thing with all of these people, and it's just a very obviously, for obvious reasons, like dangerous path to start walking down, but that doesn't mean it's a false one.
Yeah, well, are you familiar with Daryl Cooper?
No, it sounds familiar.
He's the guy who went on Tucker Carlson and said Churchill was the primary villain of World War II. I don't know if you caught that whole discourse. I like Daryl Cooper a lot, despite the fact that many people call him a Nazi. I like him because it's very clear he's not. He wrote a Substack piece that hits home for me, actually, in the degree to which he talks about how he, grew up around people, harsh people, let's say, and how there's a big difference between, being kind of a shit poster edgelord versus having genuine hatred towards someone and not letting, and that being the fundamental kind of motivating thing. And he was on Joe Rogan not too long ago, and he gets the criticism. Douglas Murray brought this up on Joe Rogan, the whole historical revisionism and stuff. And it's like, to your point, there's two things. Again, it's ironic because I'm deeply influenced by Jordan Peterson. We've talked about this before.
Yeah.
He's now very pro Daily Wire, pro Netanyahu, I guess. I've never seen him say anything against it, which is ridiculous. But it's ironic because it's exactly what you said about, like, the moment you attribute supernatural evil to someone, you now become exactly the kind of person who's susceptible to that evil because you think, well, I could never be like that. It's not within the normal human to do those things. It's like, I actually do take seriously the idea that, like, well, could the Holocaust, could Kristallnacht type stuff happen in the United States? Like, of course it can. It can happen anywhere. That's human nature. And I take that seriously. And hence the point of you have to look, well, never again means knowing exactly how, things got there. And I think Daryl Cooper's done he's done a long podcast on the history of Zionism going way back that I think is phenomenal and very much does what you talk about in terms of putting yourself in the shoes of starting with an Eastern European Jew in the middle of a pogrom.
Yeah.
Like, oh, I wonder why Israelis are so keen on carving out a state for themselves. Like, look at the history. We learned a lot about the Holocaust, but like, and obviously for the scale, but like the pogroms were as bad and vicious and psychotic as anything else. But then there's the flip side of, like, it wasn't just the Holocaust. There's many people that were exterminated and wiped out en masse. And if you learn history, if you learn about World War II in China or Japan, it's just one footnote. Yes, there was a Holocaust in Europe, and that's how we treat, like the Maoist revolution or even a lot of stuff with what Japan did. Like, yes, Japan was as evil as Germany by any, if you're going to look at it objectively. And it's just and I think
Zionism, just as a note to that, because it's forgotten, the reason why, there's no state for the Roma. There, the gays of Poland didn't get their, plenty of exterminations were underway under the absolute awful eruption of ethnic cleansing and genocide during World War II, led by the Nazis, but lots of people were joining in. Because of what I planted the seed of the Rothschilds and all that, they were a massively wealthy and influential family that had huge wealth, and it wasn't just them, but there was Jewish bankers. Again, this isn't some sneaky, slimy Jews, or they were sort of pushed into this kind of stuff, but they had an undue amount of financial influence and back scratching with all of the European powers, including England, obviously at the time, that they were able to try to get this project underway, that where other groups, I'm sure, would have tried and got nowhere. Wealth talks. We know this. So I just wanted to put that out there of, Zionism is a crazy effort, I really think. I think in history, it's just one of the most insane things that has ever been attempted to happen so quickly. But I'm sure others would have tried and did try and literally just didn't have the financial means to even get the project off the ground or garner support from, there was no reason for England to write a Balfour Declaration for anyone else, but there definitely was for the Zionist project, because that was a foothold for them, and there was the banking and everything else. So yeah, I just wanted to put that out there of like, history matters here. History really matters. So the Rothschilds, right? So the Rothschilds, which everyone knows is this banking family, which has a fascinating history on its own right. It obviously immediately alerts all the conspiracy theory stuff, but the Rothschilds is a super, super wealthy banking family in the 1800s, 5 sons from Meyer Rothschild, which started in the 1700s. But Edmund Rothschild, I believe he was the French one. There was sons in every spot. In the late 1800s, there was already, people who could kind of see the writing on the wall of a collapsing sort of global order. You got to put yourself into the mind of late 1800s, where it's imperialism, overt colonialism. If you looked at a map, there's a map in front of me right now. It's just splotches of French Western Africa, and all of Australia is basically under the British flag. Like, it's a very different looking world. But there's, I think, a sense that this is all going to crumble and collapse, potentially into a world war that's going to break out. And it's when the early seeds of this kind of nationalism that we've come to be very familiar with are sort of taking hold. And anti-Semitism, which was not new in Europe, was a question and a concern to a degree. And there was conversations about this. So Edmund Rothschild, it's hard to, this is where it gets very muddy. He's someone who literally, he starts, when you hear about defenders of Israel and the Zionist history say, like, they just bought the land and they just, they moved there. This is really who they're talking about. Edmund Rothschild bought large tracts of land in historic Palestine, sort of in like the north of Jerusalem now, from the Sursak family, which was an Orthodox Christian family of Arab family, who probably also was sensing that, and they were absentee landlords. They owned this land in Palestine for centuries, and Muslim Arabs were basically farming it. And this absentee Sursak family, and many like them, owned the land. The Rothschilds are buying things from the Sursak family. It's challenged by the Arab Muslims, especially the farmers, being like, what the hell just happened? Like, they get kicked off their land. And it's sanctioned and sort of stamped of approval by the Ottoman Empire, which was like soon to collapse. Like, the whole thing is kind of begins the seeds of telling the story of how the Arab Muslim, known as the Palestinian now in that era, like, starts to get screwed by a series of forces in the world that are kind of beyond their control, and not always overtly anti-Muslim, anti-Arab, whatever. Like, they were sort of just always pushed to the side. It starts even then. But Edmund Rothschild, not like the cleanest historical figure in the world, but was pretty insistent that these farms, and he was mostly importing Russian and Eastern European Jews who were facing the worst forms of overt anti-Semitism at that point, and who wanted out into Palestine. But this wasn't like the settlers now today you see in Israel, where they were like super aggressive. He was really insistent that they integrate and they hire Arab labor and they work and they keep good relations. It wasn't always perfect, but it was for everything that anyone can read, he was trying to sort of do this egalitarian thing. Now, part of that, and so someone like Herzl comes along in 1897 with a much more aggressive form of Zionism and comes out with the book and the First Council of Zionism. And Edmund Rothschild hated this thing, and for sort of 2 reasons. And it's kind of the same exact reasons that we're still dealing with today. One is, he thought, if you're so aggressively politically engaged in this Zionist project about wanting a Jewish homeland elsewhere, you're going to increase the charges of anti-Semitism, of dual loyalty in Europe. So you're actually going to make anti-Semitism worse. And, most Jews sort of like weren't interested in this. They felt like they were pretty much assimilated into their European world. Now, the question is whether they were or not, right? Like, but they kind of felt they were. And suddenly there's this Jewish nationalist foreign project, and they're getting sort of, charged with that their dual loyalty and anti-Semitism's on the rise. And of course, even Edmund Rothschild is like, well, there's people there, and if you have bad relations with the Arabs in Palestine, you're going to make it unsafe there. It's literally like the same argument we're having here. Herzl dies pretty early in this process, like 1904 or 3 or whatever, and Chaim Weizmann and a few other. The Zionists who end up taking on the project in Europe in the early 1900s are even more aggressive and more political. And so you have this situation where it's kind of like this impossible catch-22. And so just to do the family thing, there was other Rothschilds, including, of course, the one who Lord Balfour writes the 1917 Balfour Declaration to, the Rothschilds, who were much more aggressively politically Zionist and were basically convinced that the Jew will never be accepted and assimilated in Europe. He will be expelled. He's always been expelled in every land he's ever been to. We need this safety boat. So you have this catch-22 where you kind of can't prove either side right in history, right? Like Edmund looks right because he's like, hey, your big political project made anti-Semitism worse and suddenly we had Nazis. And then the other side is like, no, we were right because look, they never really wanted us. They were just waiting to kick us out. And so we needed this. So you get this weird thing where like history doesn't just tell a clean story, where both sides of that did the Zionist project lead to the persecution or the extermination of the Jews, as Edmund was worried about. Is that true, or is the other way true, that actually Edmund was a fool and naive and should have been more aggressive because Europe was going to expel them anyway? And I don't think there's any way to like litigate that history, right? And so like I'm talking early Zionism when all of this started. So like when people say you have to start in 1948, they're already too late. You don't have to start forever ago. The people who say you have to start with like the fall of the Second Temple and Moses, I think, are out of their minds, and we could talk about like that aspect of it. But you should go back to the late 1800s, and I don't know how to litigate that history, and I'm not sure anybody really can. But that starts the process of this project that is where it is today. But the important thing to answer your question of like who I am is I don't feel alone. I don't feel weird. Like when you read the history of it, there is such a long tradition of people who were worried about it in the exact way that Edmund was worried about it, even while it was increasing its temperature, like Hannah Arendt and all of these people.
Right. Yeah.
Criticizing what's happening there. And so I don't think I think that trajectory really just hasn't changed since that initial conversation. Here we are just with like this obvious, it was always going to get here endpoint. And so, yeah, to answer it on a personal level, I think it's unjust. I obviously think it's unwise. I think it's genuinely going to be suicidal, potentially World War III triggering. And in the end, unfortunately, again, as a leftist, unnecessary. I think all of it comes from a place of just, whether it's founded or not, kind of like our worst fears of coexistence and working with each other. And so
what would you, as someone who is Jewish racially, if someone were to say to you, or if you, I don't know, let's say you were out at a bar and a conversation kind of struck up and, someone started saying, Jews run the world. They run the banks, they run the media. It's all a big conspiracy. Look at the Rothschild, look at this. Yeah. And it's in their genetics. It's a conspiracy, and that's what's going on. Well, I mean, how would you even, assuming that person could be reasoned with and was not frothing at the mouth, which sometimes that is the case. They are frothing at them and they can't be reasoned with, and they need different things. But assuming someone has that belief, what would you say, or how would you approach that? Yeah. Assuming they knew that you were Jewish too.
Yeah. This is dangerous territory now. Like all this stuff, it's fun. My first thing would be to like tell them they're not imagining something, right? Like I hate when people just deny these things of like, yeah, there's a tremendously outsized, overrepresented percentage of Jews in powerful media positions and law firms and banks or whatever. Of course, I would try to repeat a lot of the stuff I just did of the history of sort of why that happened, which should cure them of the genetic disposition towards banking or being lawyers or something. That it was a bit of a sort of, they were pushed into it as because I think that's interesting. But yeah, it's how would I thread this needle? Because how do I do this? This is gonna be tricky.
That's fair. That's fair.
It's not that hard of a question, but it's hard to not just open up the you're talking about a worldwide conspiracy that people have pegged on Jews. And that very much mirrors where Hitler's sort of mind went and many people's minds went. And it's so hard to say, God, I don't even know how to do this. Like, you're not wrong that there's a worldwide conspiracy. It's just not the Jews that actually like thought it up. Because I don't think it is. They participate in it because of where they happen to be in banking or whatever. But like, if anyone, we haven't, like, very few people that I've seen, other than like esoteric historians who really get into this kind of stuff, have had these open debates talking about the petrodollar and its relation to Henry Kissinger and Israel and the 1973 OPEC crisis and Sadat. And like, by bringing up the global financial system, which, and this is probably for a separate podcast, I do think is a bit of a Ponzi scheme conspiracy set to collapse and fail. And you start talking about, what were Sadat's motivations in 1973, or the OPEC thing in 1973, or the Yom Kippur War, or 67. You could go to all of these things. You could go back to FDR and his meetings with Saudi Arabia in the 30s. Like, there is a rigged game. This is what I'm trying to tell you. If I meet someone like that, I assume they think the world is rigged against them.
Yeah, right.
And they're starting to peg the Jews.
Small number of people.
Yeah.
And look, everywhere you go, the Jews are involved in this, the Jews are involved in that. You can find at least one Jew in any historical event.
Which is probably just going to happen.
Yeah, right, which is true. Yeah, right.
They're like, well, they had the money and it wasn't really their fault. They were trusted with the money. But yeah, you're going to. You literally are. So connecting those dots. Yeah, but so that's the hard part, Paul. That's what I'm saying. Like, people like ChatGPT and these kinds of things, it is a sweet spot right now. Again, ask for sources. I know it can be and all that stuff, but like, there is this. I really feel like we're in this moment where people can actually learn. It's really good at reasoning. If you're like, give me a bunch of the things. Like,
you can do deep research and stuff where it's like, give me the pros and cons on either side.
Yeah, and I urge people to just like scratch the surface on some of these things of like, the argument that 9/11 was blowback. Like, ask it and really get it, and ask about how someone like Osama bin Laden, who I agree is completely captivated at a certain point by religious ideology and mythology, and it's part of his justification and everything. But ask about the best argument that it was blowback, about his feelings that the Saudi kingdom cracked in the 1973 OPEC oil crisis and basically sold their soul to the American dollar to create the petrodollar in exchange to make themselves insanely wealthy and allow, American military boots there. All of that stuff, like, it's not made up, right? Like, we can argue all day about what genuine, real motivations are for everything, and this is very much your sort of Jordan Peterson or whoever else. It's kind of all true. But so if I met someone in a bar like that, my first thing is like, don't deny. Like, if they're telling me there's Jewish space lasers, then we're like, okay, you've gone a little deep into the deep
that
end.
might be the frothing at the mouth part.
Right,
but
like, let's pull it back a little to be like, I agree with you that there is a rigged game in the world. And here's the thing. This is what I've always said about conspiracy theory versus where I think we actually are when you study things. It's like, I think I've told you this before. I've lost some really good friends to conspiracy theories. Like, killed themselves, like lost themselves, and I'm very careful with this kind of stuff. I know these conversations, and it's always this line. It's when you have discovered who benefits from a world event, it does not necessarily mean you have located who engineered a world event.
Totally.
Right? And so but once you start looking and questioning whether something like the petrodollar or the American dollar being the world reserve, or that Saddam Hussein, we were told, was weapons of mass destruction and was a madman, is gassing his own people, but was saying, I want to sell oil in the euro instead of the dollar. What a surprise, we invade the next day. Or Gaddafi says, I want the gold dinar. Suddenly he's dead. Or Venezuela now is a disaster, which is the largest reserves in the world of oil. Like once you start wondering and questioning if the global financial system might be a bit of a potentially collapsing scheme that people are desperate to keep together for maybe good reasons, and we can argue about the ethics of that, the incentives arise for these kinds of things, which is different than engineering them, which is different than like saying
Right.
9/11 inside job, right?
And that's sort of the George Carlin point of you don't need a formal conspiracy to have a convergence of incentives.
Yes.
And it's like it's not a conspiracy for the Catholic Church. Well, the Catholic Church is a bad example because they are a formal organization. But like, it's not a conspiracy that a bunch of Christians get together to make abortion illegal or something like that. It's like that's the product of their idea. It's like once you have the ideology, it sets them on a goal, and the ideology is sort of the uniting mechanism. Yeah. And it's like, well, okay, what happens when it's profit and financial power is the incentive? It's like, okay, well then the conspiracy is capital. Yeah. I mean, to your point, it's like, I 100% agree that what you have to do is I've always said, you need to rob your ideological opponents of their best talking points.
Yes.
And if someone says, well, Jews disproportionately, run media and banks, it's like, that's objectively, yes, and also anyone who tells you otherwise is gaslighting you. Yeah. Because I'll go to the Holocaust Museum website and they say the same thing.
Yeah.
But again, they give the reasons for it. But it's like the first impulse, if you want to have people walk back from that ledge, is to just full-throatedly agree. Because the moment you start trying to, don't do that, or play, it's like, well, then they're not going to trust me.
Yeah.
Why would they? And I see that with other people. I like. If someone can't, like Jordan Peterson has not once, I don't even think so much as mentioned the Israeli settlers once. He's not once given any credence to, hey, why is there such massive opposition to Israel, and particularly the right-wing thing? So it's like, I know now that on the Israel show, there's nothing that he's going to say that is of interest to me until he addresses that, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, and I've seen it with friends who are progressive, and progressives are sort of not pre-wired, but if you come up in American progressivism, hates Hitler as much as any Jew, right? And to see then like progressive friends start being like, man, dude, there's a lot of Jews involved in all this different shit and stuff, and it's like and again, but again. Once you create the space of like, of course, the freaking, you've seen those images of like, here's all the owners of all the different media companies, and they put the Jewish stars over them. It's like,
I haven't seen.
Yeah,
that's dangerous territory.
Right? Correct. Yeah, they're, but it's like, but it's like a fact's a fact, right? A fact's a fact. It's like, okay, but once you're in that mode of like, all right, are we cool? Are we cool here? Okay, we can talk kind of openly. It's not Jews as such, right? Like, that some of the best critics of Israel are Jewish themselves.
But what's the question would be, are Zionists overrepresented in those positions? And that gets a little trickier rather than Jews, Jewish Zionists, because I'm hinting at, and this is the part is volatile, but the Zionist project, somewhat from its inception, but again, everyone struggles to define what it really is, but has become, I don't even know how to do this historically, but has become intimately tied with the kind of nod I just gave to a potentially global financial scheme of sorts that, not everybody is so thrilled with. And so Zionism as a friend to the empire, or potentially driver of it, however you want to put there, like that. So you are more likely to find very, very wealthy, powerful Jews who probably are Zionists because it confers a system that has benefited them a lot. Like Sheryl Sandberg being a Zionist, and she's ridiculous, but being a Zionist she's a billionaire, right? She worked for the World Bank, for God's sake. You're unlikely to find an anti-Zionist Jew in those positions. So that's where it gets a little bit tricky. There might be some, but you're not going to find as many at that level. And that opens up just a whole conversation and can of worms. But I also wanted to put out like another story, if you'll let me, about how this operates on like an individual level, and to your point about compassion for people and how deep we're at is two things. One thing is, I love that point you said of take sort of your opponent's best argument against them or rob them of it.
Yeah. And so then all they're left with is the frothing at the mouth nonsensical stuff. And
it's not even necessarily to win in sort of a tactical debate thing, although it's good for that too. But also, I try to do that all the time. I put out a recent essay where, because nobody will talk to me about this anymore, I just started a debate by myself. And it's clearly sort of aimed at Sam, just because I know his arguments.
That's the when is resistance justified one, right?
Yeah. And I also, after putting it out, I rewatched my own film because I was a little afraid of it, to be honest, Islam and the Future of Tolerance. So I was pleased to know that's really, really good. I actually think it's a really good film. And Sam even mentions the Palestinians in it around the hour or something mark that people should note and watch, because I'm not making it up that I'm constantly using Sam's own arguments against him, being like, dude, listen to yourself. But I feel like after 9/11, again, you were a little younger, but after 9/11, when that first conversation really broke onto the scene, in the circles I was with, there was almost a litmus test that you needed to pass just to get through the front door. And it was that the meme of Islam is a religion of peace. You had to basically say, that's bullshit, that's a lie. And if you could say that, that gets you in the room. But I think I and a few other people, very few, who've survived that world and now after October 7th can still say that and still be vehemently anti-Zionist, is like so few of us who've been able to do that. That's why they won't talk to me, because they just constantly talk to someone and they're shadow boxing with people who just think that, it's that we're just that progressives are living in some delusion where they think that, all religions are genuinely peaceful and everybody really wants the same thing. And, no one's really captivated by heaven. We just kind of deny that anybody would really blow themselves on a bus to try to get virgins in heaven or something like that. That's who they're talking to. And they think it's foolish. And they think everyone's just an apologist for Hamas and doesn't understand jihadism or whatever, or this is just a bigger emergency. That's not me. And it's so frustrating that I've now been sort of blackballed by that community.
I mean, well, I'll end with this, but it is absolutely the case that I see it on Theo Vaughn's podcast. I see it on Joe Rogan. I see it in my friends. I see it in sporadic points of people just going, what's going on here? Why we're just unconditionally supporting Israel? It's just, well, the Holocaust happened, therefore we have to now suddenly, anything Israel does now is justified. It's and of course, the Zionists will not say, well, just because the Holocaust happened, anything we say is justified. But it's certainly how it plays out often. And the Douglas Murray, Dave Smith podcast was just so interesting. Of just this is one of Israel's best defenders. And his argument is it's weird that you're doing that. That's all I'm saying. It's weird that you're talking about the Rothschilds. It's weird that you talk about Paul Wolfowitz, the deputy defense secretary. It's like, really, that's your argument? It's weird. Yeah. And so in my mind, independent of whether or not my audience is caught up to this, it's like that wave is moving through society. Yeah. And it's going to move no matter what. And there is no other option other than to say, all right, now we have to just go, okay, radical truth here. We have to go. When in doubt, you need to say what you believe to be true as best as you can. And if it comes down to that, okay, well, what is the truth in all this Rothschild stuff? It's it's relevant historical fact.
Yeah, it's relevant.
And it's and so many, it's like when people talk about George Soros or whatever.
Yeah.
It's like, well, Alex Jones chirps on that all the time, and Alex Jones is objectively ridiculous in so many ways. Which is a true conspiracy theorist would say that Alex Jones is specifically made to be a lot that Alex Jones is allowed to broadcast his shit so that when he says true things, it can be associated with him. And then it's like, well, what you sound like Alex Jones now?
The meta conspiracy.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Which, it's, which I don't believe for what it's worth. I think Alex Jones is plenty. It's obvious why, for all of his faults, he certainly is entertaining. So it's obvious why he has the reach that he does. But like with George Soros, it's like, I never knew I just heard George Soros from here. Okay, this is an Alex Jones thing. It's like George Soros is a real person. It's like David Koch or the Koch brothers. It's the equivalent of like, someone talks with the Koch brothers. It's just an insane progressive person. It's like, no, these are real billionaires with real power that you can look at their NGOs that are funded. It's like, and so it's difficult because the conversation is so sensationalized, but it's like, I think it just has to be, if reasonable heads have to prevail, otherwise it will just be dominated by the extremists who just take it apart. And
yeah, I mean, I think to piggyback a little of that, of like, I know Douglas a little. I interviewed him once, but read some of his stuff, and I think he is a foreshadow of ultimately. I know I've put a lot of historical pieces that I really do encourage people to like just go crack it open. I don't know how to put all the pieces together either, but like these are important things. But I think the meta narrative that maybe people like Candace Owens will get to, I don't know. She's like, there's an interesting thread of sort of the libertarian right wing or Trumper, not even right wing, just Trumper people who have sort of seen at least the sort of clash between, hey, I thought this was America first, what's with all this Israel first stuff? Yeah. Like that's a nice first step in the door. There's a deep conversation to be had here. But yeah, and I don't know how far everyone is going to walk through those doors. I mean, I was talking about this with my wife the other day because, I mean, my last interview with you was like I sort of played my leftist cards out there a little bit, and I've certainly put some of the cards on the table of hinting that I think the global economic system is a bit of a Ponzi scheme that's rigged to explode in debt and whatever. We could talk about the gold standard and all that kind of stuff, but there's almost this like desire for wanting people to sort of see the illusion of a lot of the narratives that we have or are given about why things happen in the world and why we go to war. Like I said, sure, Saddam Hussein, weapons of mass destruction. I mean, that lie blew up in their face, of course, too. But was it really about oil? Was it because he proposed and then started actually trading oil in the euro instead of the dollar, which was the very first thing America reversed when we got on the ground? It was like Iraq oil back in the U.S. dollar, and the fact that Gaddafi hinted at that, or the fact that Iran is in trouble now for doing that, the fact that the BRICS countries, anyway, like the meta narrative, the big narrative that Douglas Murray really is frankly more honest about. I think I didn't watch the whole thing either, but Douglas and Dave is an interesting pair. I don't think it's the right pair ultimately, obviously, but Douglas, like in his book, The Strange Death of Europe, and a few of the others, someone like Niall Ferguson, we're at this point where there's a little bit more of a sort of not hiding their cards anymore and just defending colonialism as a gift to the world rather than some sort of moral scourge, right? That this was a good thing, and the continued version of it, whatever that is, continues to be a good thing. And that's Douglas, and that's okay. And I wish he was just a little bit more honest about that, and fitting the Zionist project in Israel in particular as one of clearly the most violent front lines of that meta-narrative clash and debate between the colonial project and not, is the one that I think is lurking that we should have. So when I say like, I think it's important that more people start to see the illusion of politics, or especially Americans, this Democrat-Republican thing, which is like, it's the same goddamn system with a different paint of coat on it. Trump is trying to do something a little different for his own sake. But when the Democrats are in power, I'm constantly waiting for the Democrats and all of their voters to see the illusion. And Occupy Wall Street, like we talked about last time, was a little window into it, because it's like, you all hated George W. Bush, and then you loved Barack Obama, and they both bailed out the banks one after another. And you did get this little window of a bunch of people on the street being like, wait a minute, is the system messed up? And now
Kamala Harris being supported by Dick Cheney.
Yeah, well, that was one thing, but I'm not focused on the Democrats. I think they're hopeless. Great. I hope they hate Trump enough that maybe some of them will discover the Palestinian cause. Cool. The Trumpers, like, you got your guy. Now look what he's doing. Right. Do you see the illusion yet? Do you see that he's doing the same thing? Do you see that? And then ask why. Like, why is it? And I think there's a deeper meta conversation underneath of it of sort of what is driving the empire, and is empire, is it built on a bit of a conspiracy theory, of course, that you should be very skeptical of these narratives about, I mean, does anyone believe Israel's the only democracy in the Middle East anymore? Or they're like, you know what I mean?
I don't think the Israelis believe that.
Right. And no one, and frankly, it's interesting, fewer Americans care about that kind of thing. Like, is Saudi Arabia, who have been our best buddies since 1930, are they like us? Or is this the democratic, beacon that you're interested in? So I think people will start to see that how the world functions a little bit more, drop this like crazy democracy thing. But in a weird way, I'm trying to get at, like, I feel like people like Douglas actually do understand what I was just saying. And they are a little bit more, just proud of it. They have more familiarity with like the British Empire of like, yeah, we ruled the world, but we were doing it for your benefit, and you should thank us for it a little bit more. Because to put one more thing out there of like the ethos of sort of anti-imperialism and anti-colonialism as maybe being on the right side of some sort of ethical conversation. I think is important and cool to defend as a leftist, like I did last time, from some sort of justice place rather than some sort of consequentialist utilitarian mathematics place. And the reason is, and I won't name any names, but nobody has really reached out to me to respond to that open debate. But I was in conversation with one person who I used to kind of know, and it was really bad email exchange, so I wasn't going to like go anywhere further with it. But he was really trying and insisting that I was very like out of left field and out of bounds to claim that Zionism was a colonialist project. And I actually got a lot of encouragement out of that. I was like, oh, if he's going to, I'm so confident about, because it's not me, it's not the critics of Zionism who call it colonialist. It's the Zionists themselves. Like from the beginning, their colonialization department literally trying to work with Cecil Rhodes and sending him Herzl messages to him telling how much he admired him and wanting advice on how he got the colonial powers in England to help him with his project. They called it the Colonial Trust. It was a colonization project by name, saying, of course, they're going to resist. We're colonizers. The Sioux Indians also resisted, etc. Like, I'm so confident, and also because of the availability of Wikipedia and ChatGPT right now, that anybody can just, I don't need to make an argument. Like, I'm so confident that you will discover that, of course, yes, Zionism was a colonialist project and continues to be one, and therefore faced mass, fierce resistance. It's such an obvious, easy argument that I want to get past it quickly of like, because they will have to, and I think Douglas really is there of like, well, of course it's colonial. I can't do a British accent.
I know, I tried the other day. I'm not good.
But it was a good thing, and that's the debate we need to have in the world. Let's get past the bullshit that it wasn't colonial, whatever, but is it a good thing? That's it.
The next conversation we have, we'll have to talk, because I am philosophically, I'm certainly more right-wing than you on certain issues. Yeah. I think nationalism is a good thing. It can be.
Interesting. Yeah.
There are a lot of caveats to that, but I think that's definitely something we can talk about, because I agree.
Just do it in your own nation.
Right.
Yeah. Make sure the land is available. Maybe check that first. Yeah.
True.